Mom, is this our new home? The question shattered Mara Fielding's heart as her wagon lurched toward the lone ranch house, her last desperate hope after burying her husband 2 weeks ago. Three starving children huddled beneath a threadbare quilt. No money, no family, no future. Just a stranger's address scrawled on paper by a dying man's hand. When the broad-shouldered rancher stepped from the shadows, Mara's voice cracked. "Are you the one who sent word?" His answer would determine if they survived the night, or if this was where their story ended. If you're watching, drop a comment with your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now settle in, because what happens next will break your heart before it heals it. The Kansas wind had teeth. Mara Fielding felt them gnaw through her threadbare shawl as the wagon creaked westward across a landscape so barren it looked like God had given up halfway through creation. Dust devils danced across the hardpan, mocking her with their aimless freedom. She had no such luxury. Behind her lay two fresh graves, one marked with a cedar cross her husband Thomas had carved, with shaking hands before the fever consumed him. The other unnamed because their infant daughter had died before Mara could even whisper her name into the unforgiving prairie air. The wagon wheel hit another rut, and 8-year-old Samuel's head jerked up from beneath the faded quilt that barely covered him and his siblings. His eyes, too old for his gaunt face, met Mara's. "Mama?" His voice was a whisper. "How much farther?" Mara looked at the setting sun bleeding across the horizon like a wound. "Soon, baby, soon." It was a lie. She had no idea if the address Thomas had given her, scrawled on a scrap of paper by lamplight 3 nights before he died, even existed. Coulter Briggs, 5 miles west of Redemption Creek. He'll help. He owes me. That was all Thomas had managed before the coughing started again, before the blood came, before Mara had to hold him down as his body convulsed with fever dreams of battles he'd never told her about. In those final hours, Thomas had gripped her hand with surprising strength and rasped, "Promise me. Take the children to Coulter. Promise." She had promised. What else could a dying man's wife do? Now, 2 weeks later, with the last of their food gone, the horse half lame, and her children's ribs showing through their skin like xylophone keys, Mara was keeping that promise. Or trying to. If the horse didn't collapse first, if the wagon's cracked axle held, if this Coulter Briggs actually existed and wasn't just another fever dream from a dying man's broken mind. 6-year-old James whimpered beneath the quilt, and Mara's heart cracked a little more. He hadn't spoken since they buried Thomas, just whimpered and clung to his older brother like Samuel was the last solid thing in a dissolving world. "Hush now, Jamie," Samuel murmured, wrapping his thin arms around his little brother. "Mama's going to get us somewhere safe." Mara's throat tightened. Samuel shouldn't have to comfort anyone. He should be playing, laughing, being 8. Instead, he'd helped dig his father's grave with hands too small for the shovel, had stood stone-faced as Mara said words over dirt that couldn't possibly hold all the man Thomas had been. 4-year-old Lily stirred, her small hand clutching a corn-husk doll that had seen better years. "Hungry, Mama." "I know, sweetheart." Mara's voice cracked. "Just a little longer." The horse, a mare they'd named Clementine back when naming things still felt like an act of hope rather than futility, stumbled. Mara's heart lurched. If Clementine went down, they were finished. She couldn't carry 3 children across this wasteland. The wagon held everything they owned, which wasn't much. 2 quilts, a cast-iron pot, Thomas's rifle with 4 bullets, a Bible with the family names written in the front, and the clothes on their backs. "Come on, girl," Mara whispered, more prayer than command. "Just a little farther, please." The landscape offered no comfort. Scrub grass stretched in every direction, broken only by the occasional stunted tree that looked like it had given up on growing tall and settled for just surviving. In the distance, a windmill's blades turned slowly against the darkening sky. The first sign of human habitation Mara had seen in 2 days. Her pulse quickened. Please, God, please let this be it. The road, if you could call 2 wagon ruts a road, curved toward the windmill. As they drew closer, Mara made out the shape of a ranch house, small and weathered, but solid. A barn stood behind it, and a chicken coop, and what looked like a small corral. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin gray line. Someone lived here. Someone was home. Mara's hands trembled on the reins. What if this Coulter Briggs didn't remember Thomas? What if he refused to help? What if... The front door opened and a man stepped onto the porch. Even in the fading light, Mara could see he was big, broad-shouldered and tall, with the kind of physical presence that suggested he'd spent his life wrestling with land and weather and whatever else the frontier threw at him. He stood completely still, watching the wagon approach, and Mara couldn't read his expression. Clementine stopped 20 feet from the porch without being told. Maybe she sensed they'd reached the end, or maybe she just didn't have another step in her. For a long moment, nobody moved. The wind rattled through the scrub grass. The windmill creaked. Somewhere, a chicken clucked. Then the man spoke. His voice was rough, like gravel under wagon wheels, but not unkind. That wagon's not going another mile. Mara's hands tightened on the reins. Her throat was so dry she could barely form words. Are you Coulter Briggs? The man stepped off the porch, moving closer. In the better light, Mara saw his face, weathered and angular, with eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and spoken too little about it. Maybe 40, maybe older. A scar ran from his left eyebrow into his hairline. I am. His gaze shifted to the wagon, to the shapes huddled beneath the quilt, then back to Mara. And you must be Thomas Fielding's widow. Mara's breath caught. You got word? Letter came 3 weeks back. Coulter's expression didn't change, but something in his voice softened. From Doc Hendricks in Millbrook. Said Thomas was dying. Said his wife and children would be coming west. Said I should... He paused, jaw working. Said I owed him a debt. I didn't know if... Mara's voice broke. She pressed her fist against her mouth, fighting for control. She couldn't fall apart. Not now. Not in front of the children. Coulter Briggs studied her for a long moment, and Mara felt the weight of his assessment. She knew what he saw. A woman at the end of a rope, dirty and desperate, with 3 half-starved children and nothing to offer but trouble. Then he looked past her to the wagon. Those children eaten today? Mara shook her head. Yesterday? Another shake. Coulter's jaw tightened. Without another word, he moved to Clementine's head and took her bridle. Come on, old girl, just a few more steps. He led the horse toward the barn with surprising gentleness, and the wagon rolled forward. Mara sat frozen, not quite believing this was happening. Behind her, she heard Samuel whisper, Mama? Who is that man? A friend, Mara managed. A friend of your father's. Lily peeked out from under the quilt, her huge eyes taking in the ranch house, the barn, the stranger leading their horse. Is this our new home? The question hit Mara like a physical blow. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. What could she say? This wasn't their home. This was a stranger's ranch, and they were charity cases at best, burdens at worst. Coulter secured Clementine to a post and turned back to them. His eyes found Lily's small face, and for a second something flickered across his features, pain or memory or both. You're safe here, he said simply. It wasn't an answer to Lily's question, but it was enough. Mara felt something inside her chest, some band of tension she'd been holding for weeks, loosen just slightly. Coulter walked to the wagon's side and looked up at Mara. Up close she could see the lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair. Can you walk, ma'am? I can. Mara's pride bristled. She might be desperate, but she wasn't helpless. Wasn't meant as insult. Coulter's tone was level. Seen people near the end before. Sometimes they don't realize how far gone they are till they try to stand. He was right. When Mara climbed down from the wagon seat, her legs nearly buckled. Coulter's hand shot out, steadying her with a grip that was firm but not rough. Easy now. Mara gritted her teeth and found her balance. Thank you. Coulter nodded and turned his attention to the wagon bed. Samuel was already climbing out, protective arm around James. The boy met Coulter's gaze with a wariness that made Mara's heart ache. Samuel had learned not to trust strangers. They all had. You must be Samuel, Coulter said. Your pa wrote about you. Said you were steady in a storm. Samuel's eyes widened. Pa talked about me? He did. Coulter reached into the wagon and lifted James out with careful hands. The 6-year-old stiffened but didn't cry out. "And you're James. Thomas said you had a gift with animals." James looked at Coulter with something like wonder, and Mara's throat tightened. Thomas had been so proud of the way James could calm spooked horses, how he'd spend hours watching birds and squirrels, learning their patterns. But that James, the curious, gentle James, had disappeared into silence when Thomas died. Finally, Coulter reached for Lily. The little girl clutched her corn-husk doll but let herself be lifted. "And you're Lily. Your pa said you were brave as a badger." "What's a badger?" Lily whispered. "Small thing with a lot of fight." The corner of Coulter's mouth twitched. "Fierce. Like Mama," Lily said seriously. Coulter glanced at Mara, and for the first time she saw something like approval in his eyes. "Yeah, like your mama." He set Lily down and looked at the 3 children standing in the dust, dirty, hungry, scared. Orphaned in every way that mattered, even though Mara still lived. "All right," he said. "Let's get you inside and fed. Questions can wait." The ranch house was small, one main room with a kitchen area, a table, 2 chairs, and a fireplace. A bedroom opened off to the right, and Mara glimpsed a simple bed through the doorway. The place was clean but sparse, with the lived-in quality of a man who owned only what he needed and needed only what he used. "Sit," Coulter said, gesturing to the table. Mara herded the children into the chairs while she remained standing, unsure of her place in this stranger's home. Coulter moved around the kitchen with economical efficiency, stoking the fire, pulling out a pot, slicing bread from a loaf that looked fresh. Within minutes, the smell of beans and salt pork filled the air, and Mara's stomach clenched with hunger so sharp it was painful. Lily whimpered, and Samuel put his hand over hers. "Soon," he whispered. "Mama said soon." Coulter heard. His shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn around. He just worked faster. When he finally placed bowls in front of the children, beans thick with meat, bread slathered in butter, they stared like they'd forgotten what food looked like. Samuel glanced at Mara, asking permission with his eyes. "Go ahead, baby," Mara said softly. They fell on the food with desperate silence, shoveling it in like someone might take it away. Coulter set a bowl in front of Mara and another at the empty place at the table, then sat down himself. He ate slowly, methodically, his eyes never leaving the children. Mara tried to eat with dignity, but it was impossible. She was too hungry, too empty. The beans were simple but perfectly seasoned, the bread was heaven, and the butter, real butter, was a luxury she'd forgotten existed. She blinked back tears and forced herself to chew slowly, to not make animal sounds of relief and gratitude. Across the table, James finished his bowl and looked at Coulter with huge, hopeful eyes. "More?" Coulter asked. James nodded frantically. Coulter refilled all 3 children's bowls without comment, then topped off Mara's. She started to protest, surely they'd already imposed enough, but he cut her off with a look. "Eat," he said. "You're half starved." It wasn't kind, but it was true. Mara ate. When the food was finally gone and the children's eyes were starting to droop, Coulter stood and began clearing the table. Mara jumped up to help, but he shook his head. "You've had a long road. Rest." "I can help," Mara insisted. "I won't be a burden here, Mr. Briggs. I can work. I can—" "Coulter," he interrupted. "Name's Coulter, and nobody said anything about burdens." He nodded toward the bedroom. "Children can sleep in there. Bed's clean." Mara stared at him. "But where will you—" "Barn's got a cot. I've slept there before." He turned back to the dishes, conversation clearly over. Mara gathered her children, who were swaying on their feet with exhaustion. The bedroom was simple. One bed with a patchwork quilt, a small dresser, a window that looked out over the prairie. It smelled faintly of cedar and soap. "Is this really ours?" Lily whispered, touching the quilt with wondering fingers. "For tonight," Mara said carefully. She tucked them into bed, all 3 children crowding together like puppies. Samuel's eyes were already closing, but he fought to stay awake. "Mama, are we going to stay here?" Mara smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "I don't know, sweetheart." "I like it here," Lily murmured. "It's warm." "Sleep now," Mara said, her voice breaking. "We'll figure out tomorrow, when it comes." She watched them drift off, their faces relaxing into the kind of peace she hadn't seen in weeks. James even smiled in his sleep, the first smile she'd witnessed since Thomas died. When Mara returned to the main room, Coulter was standing by the fireplace, staring into the flames. The dishes were washed and put away. The table was wiped clean, everything in its place. "Thank you," Mara said. The words felt pathetically inadequate. "For the food, the bed, for not turning us away." Coulter was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Thomas saved my life once, in the war. Took a bayonet meant for me." He touched his side absently, and Mara realized there must be a scar there, hidden beneath his shirt. "I told him if he ever needed anything, all he had to do was ask. He never mentioned he wouldn't have." Coulter's jaw worked. Thomas wasn't the type to collect on debts. But when that letter came, he turned to face her, and the grief in his eyes made Mara's breath catch. "I'd hoped to see him again. To tell him—" He stopped, shook his head. "Doesn't matter now." "He spoke of you," Mara said softly. "At the end, he said you were a good man." Coulter's expression hardened. He was wrong about that. Before Mara could respond, he grabbed his coat from a hook by the door. "Bolt this behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me. Understood? You think there's danger?" "I think a woman alone with 3 children should be careful." He pulled on the coat. "I'll check on the horse and settle in for the night. If you need anything, ring the bell by the door. I'll hear it." He was gone before Mara could thank him again, the door closing with quiet finality. She slid the bolt home and stood in the empty room, listening to the fire crackle and the wind whistle through the eaves. For the first time in weeks, she let herself cry. All. Morning came too early and too bright. Mara woke to the sound of an axe biting wood, rhythmic, relentless, the sound of a man who'd found a use for fury. She disentangled herself from her sleeping children and padded to the window. Outside, Coulter was splitting logs with mechanical precision, each swing perfectly controlled, each piece of wood falling exactly where he intended. He'd been at it long enough to build a considerable pile. Mara splashed water from the basin onto her face and tried to make herself presentable. It was a losing battle. Her dress was filthy, her hair a tangled mess, and she had dark circles under her eyes that no amount of cold water could erase. But she was alive, and her children were fed and warm, and that would have to be enough. The children were still sleeping, so Mara slipped outside quietly. The morning air was crisp and clean, and the sky was the kind of blue that made you believe in second chances. The ranch looked different in daylight, still sparse, still isolated, but somehow less forbidding. The barn was weathered, but solid. The chicken coop was well maintained, and the windmill turned with steady purpose. Coulter saw her coming and buried the axe in the chopping block. He was sweating despite the cool air, his shirt sticking to his shoulders. "Children still sleeping?" "Yes." Mara clasped her hands in front of her, suddenly uncertain. "I wanted to thank you again, and to ask what you expect from us." Coulter reached for a canteen and took a long drink. "Expect?" "We can't stay here forever as charity cases," Mara said. "I'm willing to work. I can cook, clean, mend. I can help with the animals, the garden if you have one. Samuel's strong for his age, and Mrs. Fielding—" "Mara," she interrupted. "If we're going to be living under your roof, even temporarily, you should call me Mara." Coulter studied her with those unreadable eyes. "Mara," he said carefully, "you just buried your husband 2 weeks ago. Your children are half starved. You don't need to prove your worth to me." "Then what do you want?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "Everyone wants something, Mr. Briggs, Coulter. Nobody helps strangers out of pure goodness." "Thomas wasn't a stranger." "Thomas is dead." Mara's voice cracked on the word. "And his debt died with him. So tell me plainly, what do you want from us? Because I won't have my children raised on uncertain charity, never knowing when the hammer's going to fall." Coulter set down the canteen. When he spoke, his voice was surprisingly gentle. "Your husband saved my life, Mara. He took a wound that should have killed him, and he survived it long enough to get me to a field hospital. I've carried that debt for 15 years. Now he's gone, and I can't repay him. But I can make sure his children have a roof over their heads and food in their bellies." He paused. "That's all I want, to balance the scales." Mara wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But hope was a dangerous thing for a widow with 3 children and nowhere else to go. For how long? She asked. Long as you need. And if I can't work? If I can't contribute, then you rest until you can. Coulter's jaw set. I'm not looking for a servant, Mara, or a... He stopped, seemed to reconsider his words. This is a working ranch. There's always more to do than one person can handle. If you want to help, I won't refuse, but it's not a condition of staying. Before Mara could respond, the ranch house door opened and Lily appeared, corn-husk doll clutched to her chest. She looked tiny in the doorway, her blonde hair a wild tangle around her face. Mama? She called nervously. I'm here, baby. Mara hurried toward her daughter, but Lily was already moving toward Coulter, drawn by some instinct Mara couldn't name. The little girl stopped a few feet from the big rancher and looked up at him solemnly. Good morning, Mr. Coulter. Coulter crouched down to her level. Morning, Miss Lily. You sleep all right? Lily nodded, then held up her doll. This is Daisy. She was hungry. Was she now? Coulter's expression softened in a way Mara hadn't seen before. Well, we can't have that. Think she'd like some breakfast? Yes, please. Coulter stood and offered his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Lily took it. Mara watched, throat tight, as her daughter, who'd been terrified of strangers for weeks, walked hand in hand with Coulter Briggs toward the house like it was the most natural thing in the world. Samuel appeared in the doorway next, with James right behind him. The boys watched their sister with wide eyes. It's all right, Mara called. Come on down. We're having breakfast. The meal was simpler than the night before. Porridge with molasses, milk from Coulter's cow. But the children ate with slightly better manners this time, their desperate hunger eased by knowing there would be more. Coulter sat at the head of the table, quiet and watchful, and Mara realized he was learning them, studying how they interacted, what they needed, who they were beneath the fear and grief. Samuel, Coulter said suddenly, you know your way around horses? The boy looked up, surprised to be addressed directly. Some, sir. Pa taught me to brush them and check their hooves. Your mama's mare needs tending. Thought you might help me with that after breakfast. Pride flickered across Samuel's face, the first Mara had seen in weeks. Yes, sir. I can do that. James, Coulter continued, chickens need feeding. Think you can handle that? James didn't speak, but he nodded eagerly. And Miss Lily, Coulter turned to the little girl. I've got a garden that's getting overgrown. Could use someone to pull weeds, but it's important work. Garden won't grow right if the weeds take over. Think you're up for it? Lily straightened in her chair. I can pull weeds, Mr. Coulter. Good. Coulter's eyes finally landed on Mara. That leave you free to rest, or if you're determined to work, I've got mending that's piled up for months. It was brilliantly done, Mara realized. He'd given the children purpose, made them feel useful instead of burdensome, while giving her the choice to rest or work as she saw fit. No demands, no obligations stated outright, just an invitation to be part of something. I'll take the mending, Mara said softly. Thank you. After breakfast, they scattered to their tasks. Coulter took Samuel to the barn to work on Clementine, and Mara watched through the window as the man showed her son how to properly wrap a horse's injured leg. Samuel listened with intense concentration, asking questions that Coulter answered with patience. Mara hadn't expected from such a stern-faced man. James took to the chickens immediately, scattering feed with careful precision and talking to the birds in a whisper Mara couldn't quite hear. The chickens, sensing a kindred gentle spirit, clucked around his feet without fear. Lily attacked the garden weeds with fierce determination, yanking them up and piling them in a heap that grew steadily larger. Occasionally she'd hold up a particularly large weed for approval, and Coulter would nod seriously and say, "That's good work, Miss Lily. Keep it up." And Mara sat by the window with a basket of mending, shirts with torn elbows, socks with holes, a pair of work pants with a split seam, and felt something inside her chest begin to unknot. Her hands knew this work. She'd been mending Thomas's clothes for years, darning and patching and making do with what they had. The rhythm of needle and thread was meditative, familiar, safe. For the first time since Thomas died, Mara allowed herself to imagine a future that didn't involve constant terror. Maybe they could stay here for a month, maybe 2. Long enough for the children to recover their strength, for her to figure out what came next. Maybe she could find work in the nearest town, save up enough for... A shadow fell across her work. Mara looked up to find Coulter standing in the doorway, hat in hand. Wanted to check if you needed anything. We're fine. Mara set down her mending. Coulter, I need to ask you something. All right. When you said we could stay as long as we needed, she hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Did you mean days? Weeks? Coulter was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he said, I meant what I said. Long as you need. But practically speaking, Mara, he cut her off gently. I don't know what you're planning for the future. Maybe you've got family somewhere, friends who can take you in. Maybe you're planning to head to a city, find work. That's your business, and I won't pry. But while you're here, you're safe. You and the children, that's all that matters right now. But what about one day at a time, Coulter said firmly. That's how you survive out here. One day, one task, one sunrise. Don't borrow tomorrow's troubles when today's are heavy enough. It was good advice, practical, the kind of wisdom you learn by living through hard things. Mara nodded. One day at a time. Good. Coulter put his hat back on. I'm heading into town for supplies. Be back before dark. You'll be all right here? We'll be fine. He paused at the door. Bolt it behind me. And Mara? If anyone comes around asking questions, you tell them nothing. Understood? A chill ran down Mara's spine. You expecting trouble? No, Coulter said. But I don't take chances with women and children. He was gone before she could ask what he meant. The day passed in a peaceful rhythm that felt almost dangerous in its normalcy. The children worked their assigned tasks with growing confidence, and Mara made her way through the mending basket. By afternoon, she ventured into making a proper supper, salt pork and beans again, but with fresh-baked bread and canned peaches Coulter had told her to help herself to. When Coulter returned at dusk, wagon loaded with supplies, the children ran to greet him like he was a returning hero instead of a man who'd been gone for a few hours. Mr. Coulter, Lily called, I pulled all the weeds. Did you now? Coulter climbed down from the wagon, and Mara saw he was carrying packages. Well, I brought something for hard workers. He handed each child a peppermint stick, a luxury that made their eyes go huge with wonder, and then pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle for Mara. What's this? She asked. Fabric, Coulter said gruffly. Thought you and the children could use new clothes. There's thread and needles, too. Mara unwrapped the bundle with shaking hands. Inside was good sturdy cotton, enough to make dresses for herself and Lily, shirts and pants for the boys. The fabric was simple but well made, in colors that would wear well. It must have cost— I can't accept this, Mara said, even though every fiber of her being wanted to. It's too much. It's practical, Coulter said. Can't have you all wearing rags through the winter. Makes the ranch look bad. It was a lie, a kind one, and they both knew it. But it gave Mara a way to accept without feeling like she was taking charity. Thank you, she said softly. I'll start on it tomorrow. That night, after the children were asleep and Coulter had retreated to the barn, Mara sat by the fire and ran her hands over the fabric. Tomorrow she would cut and sew. Tomorrow she would begin rebuilding something from nothing. Tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. One day at a time. Outside, the wind whispered across the prairie, and for the first time in weeks, it didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a promise. The days began to blur together in a way that felt like healing. Mara woke each morning to the sound of Coulter chopping wood or tending the animals, his movements precise and purposeful in the pre-dawn darkness. She'd rise quietly, careful not to wake the children, and start the fire, put coffee on to boil, begin the day's bread. By the time Coulter came in from the barn, the kitchen would smell of yeast and wood smoke, and he'd nod his approval without saying much of anything. They'd established a rhythm without ever discussing it. Coulter would eat quickly and head back out to start the day's work, and Mara would wake the children and feed them breakfast before sending them to their morning chores. Samuel had taken to shadowing Coulter whenever possible, learning how to mend fence posts and repair tack and read the weather in the clouds. James spent hours in the chicken coop, talking to the birds in that whisper-soft voice that was slowly finding its way back to normal speech. And Lily followed everyone, helping where she could, and chattering enough for all of them combined. It had been 2 weeks since they'd arrived, and already Mara could see the difference. The children's faces had filled out. Their eyes had lost that haunted, hollow look. Samuel smiled sometimes. James had said 3 whole sentences yesterday. Lily sang made-up songs while she worked in the garden. They were becoming children again instead of survivors. Mara herself felt stronger, though she was careful not to let her guard down completely. This peace was borrowed, temporary. She knew that. But for now, she let herself sink into the work, mending and cooking and cleaning, making herself useful enough that when the time came for them to leave, Coulter would at least feel he'd gotten something in return for his kindness. She was hanging laundry on the line one morning when Coulter approached, leading a saddled horse. Mara recognized the mare, a pretty sorrel with a white blaze, as one of Coulter's better animals. "Thought you might want to ride out with me today," he said without preamble. "Check the north fence line." Mara's hand stilled on the clothespin. "I should stay with the children. Samuel can watch his brother and sister for a few hours. He's old enough, and they won't leave the yard." Coulter's expression was unreadable. "Besides, you've been cooped up here for 2 weeks. Thought you might want to see the land." It was true. Mara hadn't left the immediate area around the ranch house since they'd arrived. The thought of riding out across the prairie, of having space and sky and wind around her again, made something in her chest ache with longing. "All right," she said. "Let me tell the children." Samuel took the responsibility seriously, standing straighter when Mara explained he'd be in charge for a few hours. "I'll watch them, Mama. I promise." "I know you will, sweetheart." Mara kissed his forehead. "Stay close to the house. If anything happens, anything at all, ring the bell." "Yes, ma'am." James and Lily were less concerned, already absorbed in their task of collecting eggs. Lily waved her corn-husk doll at Mara. "Daisy says be careful, Mama." "I will. You be good for Samuel." Coulter helped Mara into the saddle. She hadn't ridden in months, and her muscles protested the unfamiliar position, and then swung onto his own horse with easy grace. They rode out slowly, giving Mara time to find her seat, and headed north across the scrubland. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, just present. The kind of quiet that existed between people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. Mara found herself relaxing into it, letting the horse's steady gait soothe something ragged inside her. The land rolled away in gentle swells, covered in buffalo grass and sage. Here and there, clusters of wildflowers added splashes of color, purple asters and yellow black-eyed Susans and tiny white prairie stars. In the distance, Mara could see the darker line of trees that marked a creek bed. "It's beautiful," she said finally. Coulter glanced at her. "Most people find it harsh, empty." "It is harsh, but there's a beauty in that." Mara gestured at the endless sky. "Nothing hidden, everything exposed, honest." "Thomas used to say something similar." Coulter's voice went quiet. "Said the prairie didn't lie to you. If you were strong enough to survive it, you earned the right to be here." Mara's throat tightened at the mention of her husband. "Did you know him well? During the war?" "Well enough." Coulter was silent for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. "We served in the same company, Kansas Volunteers. Thomas was a corporal, steady under fire, good with the men. He had a gift for keeping people calm when everything went to hell." "He never talked about the war much," Mara said. "Just pieces. When the nightmares were bad." "Most men don't." Coulter's jaw worked. "Not the ones who saw the worst of it." They rode on, and Mara found herself asking the question that had haunted her since Thomas's feverish confession. "The bayonet. When he took the wound for you? What happened?" Coulter's hands tightened on the reins. For a moment, Mara thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "Shiloh. Second day. We were holding a position in a peach orchard, and the rebels came through like demons. I got separated from my unit, took a rifle butt to the head. Went down hard." He touched the scar on his forehead, absently. "Came to with a Reb standing over me, bayonet raised. I was done. Knew it. Then Thomas came out of nowhere, tackled the man, took the bayonet in the ribs instead of me taking it in the throat." Mara's breath caught. "He never said it was that close." "He wouldn't have." Coulter's voice was rough. "Thomas carried me back to our lines while bleeding from a sucking chest wound. Shouldn't have survived. But he did because he was too damn stubborn to die on a battlefield. Spent 3 months in a hospital tent, then went right back to the company." He paused. He saved 6 other men before the war ended. Did you know that? Mara shook her head, unable to speak. Your husband was a hero, Mara, a real one. Not the kind they write about in newspapers, but the kind that matters, the kind who saves people because it's the right thing to do, not for glory. Coulter met her eyes. That's the debt I owe, and why I'll never turn you or those children away. Ever. The weight of his words settled over Mara like a blanket, heavy but not suffocating, comforting almost. For the first time since Thomas died, she felt like someone understood the magnitude of what she'd lost. Not just a husband, but a man who'd been extraordinary in quiet, uncelebrated ways. Thank you, she whispered, for telling me. Coulter just nodded and urged his horse forward. They rode on in silence until they reached the fence line, a sturdy construction of posts and wire that stretched east and west as far as Mara could see. This is the northern boundary, Coulter said, dismounting. Marks my land from the open range. Needs checking regular. Cattle from the neighboring ranches sometimes push through, and the wire breaks in bad weather. He walked the fence line slowly, testing posts and examining wire connections while Mara watched from horseback. It was methodical work, the kind that required patience and attention to detail. The kind of work, Mara realized, that suited Coulter's temperament perfectly. How long have you had this ranch? She asked. Bought it 8 years ago, after I mustered out and spent a few years drifting. Coulter knelt to examine a loose post. Needed something to do with my hands, somewhere to be that wasn't... He trailed off. Haunted? Mara supplied softly. Coulter glanced up at her, and something in his expression shifted. Yeah, haunted. Does it work? The ranch, I mean. Does it keep the ghosts away? Sometimes. He straightened, dusting off his hands. When the work's hard enough and I'm tired enough. Other times, he shrugged. Nothing keeps them away. You just learn to live with them. Mara understood that too well. The ghost of Thomas followed her everywhere, in the way Samuel tilted his head when he was thinking, in James's gentle hands, in Lily's fearless questions. She saw him in every memory, heard him in every silence. I dream about him, she said suddenly. Almost every night. Sometimes they're good dreams. Us when we were young, before the farm failed, before the sickness. But mostly, they're the end. Him dying, me helpless. Coulter was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I dream about Shiloh, about the men I couldn't save, about Thomas taking that bayonet. He met her eyes. Guilt's a heavy load, Mara. But it's not the same as responsibility. What happened to Thomas, the fever, the dying, that wasn't your fault. I know that here. Mara touched her head. But here, she pressed a hand to her chest. Here I keep thinking if I'd been stronger, smarter, better somehow, I could have saved him. No. Coulter's voice was firm. I've seen men die from fevers like that. Seen strong men, young men, men with every advantage. Once it gets in deep, there's no fighting it. You did everything you could, and Thomas knew that. The certainty in his voice broke something loose in Mara's chest. She turned away, blinking hard against the tears that threatened. She'd held herself together for so long, for the children, for survival, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to let someone else carry the weight, even for a moment. I'm sorry, she managed. I don't usually... Don't apologize. Coulter swung back into his saddle. Grief doesn't run on a schedule. It comes when it comes. They rode back slowly, and Mara found herself telling him things she hadn't told anyone. About the early days with Thomas, when they'd been young and foolish and convinced love could conquer anything. About the farm they'd tried to build, and how drought and debt had slowly strangled their dreams. About watching Thomas grow quieter, harder, as the weight of failure pressed down on him. He was a good father, she said. Even when everything else was falling apart, he was good to the children. Patient, kind. He taught Samuel to read using the Bible. He carved James a whole barnyard of wooden animals. He'd spend hours braiding Lily's hair even though his hands were too big for the work. Sounds like him, Coulter said. Thomas always had time for what mattered. When they crested the final rise and saw the ranch spread out below, the house, the barn, the windmill turning in the afternoon sun, Mara felt a strange tug in her chest. It looked like home. Not hers, but home nonetheless. Home. The children spotted them and came running, Lily in the lead with her dress flying and Samuel trying to look dignified while clearly wanting to run too. Even James hurried forward, a rare smile on his face. "Mama!" Lily threw herself at Mara as soon as she dismounted. "We collected 12 eggs and James saw a hawk." "Did he now?" Mara scooped her daughter up, breathing in the little girl's smell of sunshine and earth. James nodded enthusiastically and pointed at the sky. "Big," he whispered. "Really big." It was the most words he'd strung together since Thomas died, and Mara's eyes burned with grateful tears. "That's wonderful, Jamie. Did you watch where it went?" James nodded again, and Samuel jumped in. "He tracked it all the way to the creek trees, Mama, just like Pa taught him." The mention of Thomas didn't sting quite as sharply as usual, maybe because Mara could still hear Coulter's words, "Your husband was a hero," echoing in her mind. Thomas lived on in these children, in the skills he'd taught them, the values he'd instilled. That mattered. That night, after the children were asleep and Coulter had started toward the barn, Mara called out to him. "Coulter, would you like to have coffee before you go? I made a fresh pot." He paused, hand on the door. For a moment she thought he'd refuse. Then he nodded and came back to the table. They sat across from each other, cradling tin cups of strong black coffee, and talked about small things, the fence repairs needed, the garden's progress, Samuel's aptitude for ranch work. Easy conversation that felt less lonely than the silence Mara had grown accustomed to. "He's a good boy," Coulter said. "Samuel, smart, pays attention." "He's had to grow up too fast," Mara said. "They all have." "Maybe, but that's not always a bad thing. My pa used to say hard times either break you or make you. Those children aren't breaking." Mara smiled despite herself. "No, they're not." Coulter finished his coffee and stood. "Thank you for this. The coffee, I mean." "It's your coffee," Mara pointed out. "You made it. That's different." He headed for the door, then paused. "Mara, you did good today. Writing out, talking. I know it wasn't easy." "It helped," she admitted. "Thank you." After he'd gone, Mara sat alone in the firelight and let herself acknowledge what she'd been avoiding for days. She didn't want to leave. This ranch, this life, this quiet routine, it felt right in a way nothing had since Thomas got sick. The children were thriving. She was sleeping through the night for the first time in months. And Coulter was steady, reliable, safe. But safety wasn't the same as belonging, and Mara knew better than to confuse hospitality with permanence. Eventually, she'd need to make a plan. Find a town where she could work, maybe as a laundress or a cook. Save enough to rent a room. Build something sustainable for her and the children. Eventually. But not yet. Not while the children still needed this peace, this healing. Not while Mara herself was still learning how to breathe without Thomas. One day at a time, she reminded herself, just like Coulter said. One day at a time. The weeks rolled on, marked by small changes. Samuel grew another inch and started wearing one of Coulter's old hats. James began talking in full sentences again, usually to the chickens, but sometimes to people too. Lily's laughter became a constant soundtrack to the ranch, bright and unrestrained. And Mara sewed. She made the children new clothes from the fabric Coulter had bought. Sturdy pants and shirts for the boys, a practical dress for Lily with room to grow. She made herself 2 dresses, simple but well-fitted, that didn't hang on her frame like a scarecrow's rags. She even, shyly, offered to make Coulter new shirts to replace the ones she'd mended multiple times. "You don't have to," he said. "I want to," Mara replied. "You've given us so much. Let me give something back." So she measured him, trying not to notice the breadth of his shoulders or the lean strength in his arms, and cut and sewed 2 work shirts in sturdy blue cotton. When she presented them to him, carefully folded, Coulter held them like they were made of gold. "These are fine work," he said quietly. "They're just shirts." "No," he met her eyes. "They're more than that." Mara didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and went back to her mending. But something had shifted between them. She felt it in the way Coulter started staying for second cups of coffee in the evenings, in the way he asked her opinion on ranch matters, in the way he smiled, actually smiled, when Lily demanded he push her on the rope swing he'd hung from the barn's crossbeam. One morning, Mara woke to find Coulter already in the kitchen, fumbling with the coffee pot. He looked almost embarrassed when she appeared. "Thought I'd get a start on breakfast," he said gruffly. "You were up late mending last night." "You don't have to—" "I know." He poured water into the pot with exaggerated care. "But you do everything else around here. Seems only fair." They worked side by side, Coulter handling the coffee while Mara mixed biscuit dough. Their movements developed an easy choreography, Mara reaching for the rolling pin just as Coulter stepped aside, Coulter handing her the flour without being asked. It was domestic and simple and strangely intimate. "Coulter," Mara said suddenly, "why haven't you married? A man with a ranch like this, you could have had your pick of women." The question hung in the air. Coulter was quiet for so long Mara thought she'd overstepped. Then he said, "I was married, once. Long time ago." Mara's hand stilled in the dough. "What happened?" "She died. Childbirth. The baby too." His voice was flat, emotionless, the tone of a man who'd buried his grief so deep it couldn't reach the surface anymore. 8 years ago, right after I bought this place, we were going to build it together, raise a family. Instead, I buried them both on the hill behind the barn. "Coulter." Mara's throat closed. "I'm so sorry." He shrugged, but the movement was stiff. "Long time ago, like I said. Time doesn't make it hurt less, just different." "No," he agreed, "it doesn't." They finished breakfast in silence, but it was a companionable one now, weighted with shared understanding. They'd both lost people they loved. Both knew what it meant to wake up to an empty bed, to hear phantom voices, to carry grief like stones in their pockets. When the children tumbled in for breakfast, the mood lightened. Samuel reported that Clementine was fully healed and could probably be ridden again. James announced that one of the hens was sitting on eggs. Lily wanted to know if clouds had feelings. Coulter fielded each pronouncement with equal seriousness, and Mara watched him interact with her children and felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. Not love. She wasn't ready for that. Maybe wouldn't ever be ready for that again. But something like it. Something warm and steady and terrifying in its implications. After breakfast, while the children scattered to their chores, Coulter lingered at the table. "Mara, there's something I need to tell you." The seriousness in his tone made Mara's stomach clench. "What is it?" "Had a visitor in town last week. Didn't mention it because I didn't want to worry you." Coulter's jaw was tight. Man asking questions about a widow with 3 children, traveling west from Kansas. Mara's blood turned to ice. "What kind of man?" "Mean-looking sort, scar on his cheek. Said he was looking for family." Coulter's eyes locked on hers. "You know anyone like that?" Mara sat down heavily, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. "Levi Mercer," she whispered. "Who is he?" "Thomas's cousin, or claimed to be. I was never sure if it was true." Mara's hands were shaking. She clasped them together to still them. "He showed up after Thomas got sick, said he'd heard about Thomas's trouble, wanted to help. But the way he looked at me, the things he said—" "What things?" Coulter's voice had gone dangerously quiet. "He said when Thomas died, I'd need a man to take care of me. That family takes care of family." Mara's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "He said the children would need a father, and he was willing to step up. But the way he said it, the way he touched my arm—" She shuddered. "I told him to leave. Thomas made him leave, even sick as he was. Levi went, but he said I'd change my mind once I was alone. Said he'd be back to collect what was his." Coulter's expression had gone hard as granite. "Did he threaten you directly?" "Not in words, but the implication was clear." Mara looked up at him, fear sharp in her chest. "Coulter, if he finds us here—" "He won't." Coulter's voice was steel. "And if he does, he'll leave again, permanently. You don't know him. He's cruel, violent. I saw the way he treated his horse, heard stories from people who knew him. And he thinks I belong to him somehow, like I'm property to be claimed." "You belong to yourself." Coulter stood, and there was something in his posture that reminded Mara he'd been a soldier, that he'd killed men and watched men die. And to those children, nobody else. But what if— "Mara." Coulter knelt beside her chair so they were eye to eye. I made a promise to Thomas to keep you safe. That means from weather, from hunger, and from men who think they can take what's not theirs." His voice gentled slightly. "You're under my protection now. Levi Mercer shows his face here. He'll learn what that means." Mara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this ranch, this man, could stand between her and the darkness she'd been running from. But hope was a luxury she'd learned to ration carefully. "What did you tell the man in town? The one asking questions?" "Told him I hadn't seen any widow matching that description. Told him most travelers head straight through to Denver or Santa Fe, don't stop at small ranches." Coulter's mouth twitched. "Also mentioned that strangers asking questions tend to find more trouble than answers out here, and maybe he should move along." "Did he?" "He did, but that doesn't mean he won't come back." Coulter stood. "Which is why I'm going to teach you to shoot." Mara blinked. "What?" "The rifle. Thomas's rifle. You know how to use it?" "I've shot tin cans a few times, but then you need practice. A woman out here should know how to defend herself and her children." Coulter headed for the door. "Get the rifle. We'll start today." Over the next week, Mara learned to shoot. Coulter set up targets behind the barn, old cans and bottles lined up on fence posts, and showed her how to load, aim, and fire without flinching. Her first attempts were terrible, the rifle's kick bruising her shoulder, her shots going wild. But Coulter was patient, adjusting her stance, teaching her to breathe, to squeeze the trigger instead of jerking it. Samuel begged to learn too, and after some consideration, Coulter agreed. Father and son, not really, but close enough, stood side by side, learning to hit targets while Mara watched with a mixture of pride and fear. "He's good," Coulter said after Samuel managed to hit 3 cans in a row. "Natural eye." "Thomas taught him the basics," Mara said, "before he got sick. Thomas taught him right." Coulter handed the rifle back to Samuel. "Try the bottles now. Smaller targets." By the end of the week, Mara could hit a can at 30 yards more often than not, and Samuel was even better. It didn't make Mara feel completely safe. Nothing could, but it helped. At least if Levi Mercer came, she wouldn't be completely defenseless. But the days passed without incident. The shooting lessons became part of the routine, along with all the other work. Mara found herself falling into the rhythm of ranch life so completely that she sometimes forgot this wasn't permanent. That she and the children were guests, not family. That this wasn't home, even though it felt like it. One evening, Coulter stayed for coffee and ended up staying for supper too. They sat around the table, Mara, Coulter, and the 3 children, and it felt so natural, so right, that Mara had to look away before the tears came. This is what we could have been, she thought. Thomas, the children, me, sitting around a table, safe and fed and whole. But Thomas was gone, and this table belonged to another man, and Mara was fooling herself if she thought otherwise. After the children went to bed, Mara and Coulter sat by the fire, nursing coffee in comfortable silence. Finally, Coulter spoke. "You're good at this, you know. The ranch work, the children, all of it." Mara looked at him in surprise. "I'm just doing what needs doing." "No, you're doing more than that." Coulter stared into his cup. "This place feels different with you here. Feels alive again." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning Mara wasn't sure she was ready to examine. Before she could respond, Coulter stood abruptly. "I should check on the animals," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Good night, Mara." He was gone before she could answer, leaving Mara alone with the fire and thoughts she didn't know what to do with. The ranch felt alive again. What did that mean? And more importantly, what did Mara want it to mean? She sat there long after the fire burned down to embers, trying to answer questions she wasn't ready to ask. The answer came 3 days later, nailed to the fence post like a declaration of war. Mara found it on her way back from feeding the chickens, a single piece of paper fluttering in the morning breeze. Her hands went cold even before she unfolded it and saw the words scrawled in harsh, angular handwriting. "Mara, I know you're here. Been watching. You can't hide from family. I'm coming to collect what's mine. 3 days. Be ready. Levi." The paper slipped from Mara's fingers and tumbled across the dusty yard. Her vision narrowed to a pinpoint, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He'd been watching. How long? How many days had she felt safe while Levi Mercer lurked somewhere in the scrubland, biding his time? Mama? Mara spun to find Samuel standing in the barn doorway, concern etched across his young face. She tried to school her expression into something that wouldn't terrify him, but her hands were shaking too badly to hide. Get Coulter, she managed, right now. Samuel took one look at her face and ran. Coulter appeared within minutes, striding across the yard with Samuel trailing behind. He took in Mara's pale face, the scattered paper, and his jaw went tight. Without a word, he retrieved the note and read it, his expression growing darker with each word. Samuel, he said quietly, not taking his eyes off the paper, take your brother and sister inside. Stay there until your mama or I come get you. But now, son. Something in Coulter's tone made Samuel obey without further argument. The boy disappeared into the house, and Mara heard him calling for James and Lily in a voice that tried to sound calm but didn't quite succeed. Coulter crumpled the note in his fist. How long were you out here alone? Just a few minutes. I came to feed the chickens and… Mara's voice broke. Coulter, he's been watching us. Watching the children. For how long? Days? Weeks? Doesn't matter. Coulter's voice was hard as iron. What matters is he's not taking you anywhere. You don't understand. Levi's not like other men. He's cruel, and he's patient, and he thinks I'm his property because Thomas is dead, and… Mara wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop the shaking. I can't let him near the children. I won't. I'll leave. Tonight. We'll go somewhere he can't find us. No. Coulter caught her arm, not roughly but firmly enough to make her meet his eyes. Running won't solve this. Men like Levi Mercer, they're hunters. You run, you become prey. He'll track you down, and next time there won't be anyone to stand between you. So what do you suggest? We just wait for him to come and we prepare. Coulter released her arm and started toward the barn. And when he comes, we make sure he understands that you're under my protection, that this ranch is my land and he's trespassing. Mara hurried after him. Protection won't be enough. Not for Levi. He'll see it as a challenge. Good. Coulter pulled down his rifle from its rack, checking the chamber with practiced efficiency. Let him challenge. I didn't survive Shiloh by backing down from fights. This isn't a battlefield, Coulter. There are no rules out here. Exactly. Coulter looked at her, and Mara saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Not anger, but cold, focused determination. The look of a man who'd made a decision and wouldn't be swayed from it. Which means I'm not bound by rules either. Levi Mercer wants a fight. He'll get one. But he won't win. Despite her fear, Mara felt a flicker of something else. Hope, maybe. Or trust. This man, this quiet, steady rancher, was willing to stand between her children and danger. Was willing to risk himself for a promise made to a dead friend. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this? We're nothing to you. Strangers who showed up on your doorstep. Coulter set down the rifle and turned to face her fully. You're not strangers. Not anymore. And even if you were… He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I told you before, this ranch felt dead until you came. Like I was just going through motions, waiting for something I couldn't name. But these past weeks, with you and the children here, with voices in the house and laughter in the yard… He stopped, jaw working. I'm not letting anyone take that away. Not from you, not from them, and not from me. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Mara's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to say something, but the words tangled in her throat. Before she could untangle them, Lily's voice called from the house. Mama, Samuel says we have to stay inside. Why? Coulter and Mara exchanged glances. We need to tell them something, Mara said. They're not stupid. They'll know something's wrong. Tell them the truth, Coulter said. Not all of it, but enough. Children can handle more than we give them credit for. They gathered in the main room, the three children sitting on the bed while Mara perched on a chair and Coulter stood by the door, rifle within easy reach. Samuel's eyes kept darting to the weapon, putting pieces together. There's a man, Mara began, choosing her words carefully. His name is Levi Mercer. He knew your father, and he thinks he has some claim on our family. He's wrong, but he doesn't believe that. Is he coming here? Samuel asked, his young face far too serious. Mara glanced at Coulter, who nodded. Yes, she said, he's coming, but Mr. Coulter won't let him hurt us. I can help, Samuel said immediately. I can shoot now, No! Coulter's voice was firm but not unkind. Your job is to protect your brother and sister. If this man comes, you three stay inside, away from the windows. You don't come out until your mama or I say it's safe. Understood? Samuel wanted to argue. Mara could see it in the set of his jaw, the way his hands clenched into fists. He was 8 years old and already trying to be the man of the family, trying to fill shoes far too large for him. Samuel, Mara said gently, the bravest thing you can do is keep James and Lily safe. That's what your father would want. Can you do that? The boy's throat worked. Finally, he nodded. Yes, ma'am. James, who'd been silent throughout the exchange, suddenly spoke. Is the bad man going to take Mama away? The question pierced Mara's heart. She knelt in front of her youngest son and took his small hands in hers. No, baby. Nobody's taking me anywhere. I promise. You promised Papa wouldn't die, James whispered, and the accusation in his voice was worse than any shouting. You promised he'd get better. Mara's eyes burned. I know, and I was wrong, but this is different, Jamie. This time I have help. Mr. Coulter is going to make sure we're safe. James looked past her to where Coulter stood, studying the big rancher with those two old eyes. You promise? Coulter met the boy's gaze without flinching. I promise. Nobody's taking your mama, and nobody's hurting any of you. You have my word, James, and I don't break my word. Something in Coulter's tone must have convinced the boy, because James nodded and leaned into Mara's embrace. Lily, not fully understanding but sensing the fear in the room, crawled into Mara's lap and buried her face in her mother's shoulder. It's going to be okay, Lily mumbled against Mara's dress. Daisy says so. Despite everything, Mara almost smiled. Does she? Uh-huh. Daisy says Mr. Coulter is strong like a bear, and bears don't let bad things happen. Coulter's expression softened fractionally. Daisy's a smart doll. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Coulter moved the children's belongings to the storm cellar beneath the house, a small dark space, but defensible and hidden. He showed Samuel how to bar the door from inside and made him practice until the boy could do it in seconds. He stocked the cellar with water, food, and blankets. If things go bad, Coulter told Samuel quietly while Mara was occupied with the younger children, you get your brother and sister down there, and you don't come out until you hear your mama's voice or mine. Not for anything. Understood? What if we hear you yelling for help? Samuel asked. Especially not then. Coulter's voice was hard. That's the oldest trick in the book, son. Man gets you to open a door by pretending to be hurt. You stay locked in until you're certain it's safe. Samuel swallowed hard, but nodded. Yes, sir. Mara watched Coulter work, his movements efficient and purposeful, and felt the full weight of what he was preparing for. This wasn't a game. This was life and death, and Coulter was treating it with the seriousness it deserved. That night, nobody slept well. The children tossed and turned in the bedroom while Mara kept vigil by the window, rifle across her lap. Coulter had refused to go to the barn, instead settling into a chair by the door with his own rifle and a grim expression. You should rest, Mara said quietly, not wanting to wake the children. I can keep watch. I've gone longer without sleep. Coulter didn't take his eyes off the door. Besides, you need your strength more than I do. For what? For whatever comes after. He glanced at her. Levi Mercer's not the kind of man who gives up easy. Even if I send him packing tomorrow, he might come back, might bring friends. You need to be ready for that. Mara's hands tightened on the rifle. I won't let him take my children. I know. Something in Coulter's voice made Mara look at him more closely. That's why I trust you to keep them safe if this goes sideways. Don't talk like that. I'm being practical. Coulter's expression was unreadable in the dim light. I've been in enough fights to know they don't always go the way you plan. If something happens to me, you take those children and you run. Don't look back. Don't hesitate. Just go. Coulter, promise me, Mara. She wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him nothing would happen, that he was being paranoid. But she'd learned the hard way that promises were sacred things, not to be given lightly. I promise, she whispered, but you better not make me keep it. The ghost of a smile crossed Coulter's face. I'll do my best. They sat in silence as the night wore on, listening to the wind scrape against the siding and the distant howl of coyotes. Mara found herself thinking about Thomas, about the life they'd planned and lost. Would he approve of this? Of her finding safety with his old friend? Of Coulter risking himself for them? She thought he would. Thomas had always been practical, always put the children's welfare above everything else. He would want them protected, even if it meant another man standing in the place he'd left empty. Tell me about her, Mara said suddenly. Your wife, if you want to. Coulter was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, her name was Catherine, Katie. She was small and fierce and stubborn as a mule. His voice went soft with memory. Met her in Kansas, right after I mustered out. She was a teacher, came west to start a school. I was nobody, just a broken-down soldier with nightmares and a chip on my shoulder. But she saw something in me worth saving. You loved her. More than I thought possible. Coulter's hands tightened on his rifle. We had 6 months together, 6 good months. Then she got pregnant and everything seemed perfect. We were going to have a family, build a life. But the birth went wrong. Baby was breech, and Katie was so small. He stopped, throat working. They both died before dawn. I buried them on the hill, and I swore I'd never let anyone that close again. Mara's heart ached for him. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was 8 years ago. I've made my peace. Have you? Mara asked gently, because it sounds like you've been living in a grave with them. Coulter turned to look at her, and in his eyes Mara saw recognition. He knew what she was doing, reflecting his own words about grief back at him. Maybe I have been, he admitted. Until recently. What changed? Coulter held her gaze. You did. You and those children. You reminded me what it feels like to have something worth protecting, worth living for. The words settled over Mara like a blanket, heavy and warm and terrifying in their implications. This wasn't just about a debt to Thomas anymore. This was something else, something neither of them had planned for or knew how to name. Coulter, A sound outside cut her off. The creak of a board, the soft shuffle of footsteps. Both of them tensed, rifles coming up in unison. Could be an animal, Mara whispered. Could be. Coulter moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. But I don't think so. Another sound, closer now, definitely footsteps, and more than one set. Mara's heart hammered against her ribs. 3 days, the note had said. But it had only been 1. Levi Mercer was early. Get the children to the cellar, Coulter ordered, his voice low and urgent. Now! Mara didn't argue. She rushed to the bedroom, shaking Samuel awake and gathering the drowsy younger children into her arms. Cellar, she whispered, just like we practiced, quiet as mice. Samuel's eyes went wide and scared, but he obeyed, helping James down the ladder while Mara carried Lily. The little girl whimpered against her shoulder. Shh, baby, Mara soothed. We're playing hide and seek. You have to be very quiet. I don't like this game, Lily whispered. I know. But you're brave, remember? Brave as a badger. Once all 3 children were in the cellar, Mara pressed the rifle into Samuel's hands. You remember what Mr. Coulter taught you? The boy nodded, his small hands gripping the weapon with determination that made Mara's heart break and swell with pride simultaneously. Don't open this door for anyone but me or Coulter. Not for anyone. Do you understand? Yes, Mama. Mara kissed each of her children, lingering over them like it might be the last time. Then she climbed out and lowered the trap door, sliding the rug over it to hide it from view. If someone didn't know it was there, they'd never find it. She made it back to the main room just as a voice called from outside. Mara, I know you're in there. Come on out and let's talk like civilized people. Levi Mercer's voice was smooth as oil and just as slippery. Mara's skin crawled at the sound of it. Coulter positioned himself by the door, rifle ready. Stay back, he told Mara. Let me handle this. But Mara moved to stand beside him, her own rifle raised. He's here for me. I won't hide. Coulter looked like he wanted to argue, but there was no time. Outside, Levi was still talking. Now I know you're scared, Mara. Alone out here with those children. No man to protect you. But family takes care of family. Thomas would want me to step up, be a father to his kids, a husband to his widow. It's only right. The presumption in his words made Mara's blood boil. Before Coulter could stop her, she called out, "I'm not alone, Levi, and I don't need your help. Go away." Silence. Then Levi's laugh, ugly and knowing. "Who you got in there with you, Mara? That rancher? The war buddy?" His voice turned mocking. "You move fast, don't you? Thomas barely cold in the ground, and you're already warming another man's bed." Mara flinched at the crude implication, but Coulter's expression didn't change. "Don't let him get to you," he murmured. "That's what he wants." "Smart man, that Coulter Briggs," Levi continued, his voice closer now. "But he's just one man, and I brought friends. 3 of us out here, all armed. Now, we can do this easy, or we can do it hard. Your choice, Mara." Coulter swore under his breath. 3-to-1 odds. Not impossible, but not good either. "What do we do?" Mara whispered. "We stand our ground." Coulter raised his voice. "Mercer, you're on private property. You and your friends need to move along, now." "Or what?" Levi's voice was taunting. "You gonna shoot us? That's murder, Briggs. Law won't take kindly to that." "Self-defense," Coulter corrected. "Armed men threatening a widow and her children on my land. Any judge would call it justified." "Maybe." Levi sounded unconcerned. "But we're a long way from any judge, aren't we? Long way from any law at all." Movement in the darkness, shapes separating from shadows. Mara counted 3 figures spreading out around the house, trying to surround them. Her hands tightened on the rifle. "Last chance, Mara," Levi called. "Come out peaceful, bring the children, and we'll leave the rancher in one piece. Otherwise—" He let the threat hang. Mara's mind raced. 3 armed men against 2 defenders with her children hiding in the cellar. If shooting started, there was no guarantee how it would end. But giving in to Levi meant a life of being owned, of watching him twist her children into something dark and cruel. No, better to die fighting than live as someone's possession. "My answer is no," she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. "Now get off this land before someone gets hurt." Levi's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Wrong answer, Mara. Boys, teach them some manners." The first shot shattered the window, spraying glass across the floor. Mara ducked instinctively, her heart in her throat. Coulter returned fire immediately, and the night exploded into chaos. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like lightning. The thunder of gunshots made Mara's ears ring. She fired through the broken window, not sure if she hit anything, just trying to keep their attackers pinned down. Beside her, Coulter moved with methodical precision, each shot deliberate and controlled. "North window!" Coulter barked, and Mara spun to see a figure trying to climb through. She fired, and the man fell back with a yell. Whether she'd hit him or just scared him, she didn't know and didn't care. The gunfight lasted minutes, but felt like hours. Smoke filled the room, acrid and choking. Somewhere outside, a man was cursing in pain. Another was yelling for retreat. And through it all, Levi Mercer's voice kept taunting, kept pushing. Then, abruptly, silence. Mara's ears rang in the sudden quiet. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the rifle. Beside her, Coulter was breathing hard, blood trickling from a cut on his cheek where flying glass had caught him. "You hit?" he asked. Mara checked herself, surprised to find she wasn't. "No, you." "Just scratched." Coulter moved cautiously to the window, peering out. "They're pulling back, regrouping probably." "Is it over?" "Not yet." Coulter's jaw was set. "Men like Levi don't give up that easy. They'll wait for dawn, try again when they can see better." As if to confirm his words, Levi's voice drifted through the darkness. "This isn't finished, Mara. You can't hide in there forever. Sooner or later you'll have to come out, and when you do, I'll be waiting." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Mara sank into a chair, adrenaline draining away and leaving her hollow and shaking. "The children," she managed. "Are safe," Coulter assured her. "Cellar's solid. They probably didn't even hear much through all that earth." But Mara needed to see for herself. She moved the rug aside and knocked on the trapdoor. 3 quick raps, then 2 slow ones, the signal they'd agreed on. After a moment, she heard the bar slide back and Samuel's white face appeared. "Mama?" We're all right, sweetheart. Are you? Samuel nodded, though his eyes were huge with fear. Behind him, Mara could see James and Lily huddled together under a blanket, Lily clutching her cornhusk doll like a talisman. Stay down there a while longer, Mara said. It's not safe yet. Is the bad man gone? Not yet, but he will be. Mr. Coulter's making sure of it. She tried to smile reassuringly. Be brave for your brother and sister, Samuel. Can you do that? Yes, Mama. Mara closed the trapdoor and replaced the rug, then returned to Coulter's side. He was still watching the darkness, rifle at the ready. What now? She asked. Now we wait. Coulter glanced at her. And we pray they're not stupid enough to try again. But Mara knew, with a cold certainty that settled in her bones, that Levi Mercer was exactly that stupid, and that before the sun rose, this night would demand more blood. The hours before dawn crawled by like wounded animals. Mara kept watch at the south window, while Coulter monitored the north, both of them straining to catch any sound, any movement in the darkness beyond. The silence was worse than the gunfire had been. At least during the fight, Mara had known where the danger was. Now it could be anywhere, creeping closer with every breath. They're still out there, Coulter said quietly. I can feel them. Mara knew what he meant. The air itself felt wrong, charged with malice and waiting violence. Somewhere in that darkness, Levi Mercer was planning his next move, and the not knowing gnawed at her nerves like rats. Maybe they'll give up, she whispered, not believing it even as she said it. Wait until morning and just leave. Coulter's silence was answer enough. Around 3 a.m, Mara heard it, a faint crackling sound that didn't belong to the night wind or the settling house. She turned to Coulter, saw his nostrils flare as he caught the scent at the same moment she did. Smoke. The barn, Coulter breathed, already moving toward the door. Those bastards are burning the barn. Mara rushed to the window and saw the orange glow starting to lick up the barn's western wall. Not a big fire yet, but growing. And with it would come chaos, smoke, confusion. Exactly what Levi needed to make his move. It's a trap, Mara said, grabbing Coulter's arm as he reached for the door handle. They want you outside the moment you go to fight the fire. I know. Coulter's jaw was tight with fury. But I can't let it burn. The animals are in there. The horse, the cow, everything we need to survive winter. We'll die faster with bullets than without a barn, Mara argued, even as her heart broke at the thought of the animals trapped inside. Clementine, who'd carried them to safety, the chickens James loved, all of them burning because of Levi's cruelty. The fire was spreading faster now, climbing the dry wood with eager hunger. Through the growing light, Mara could see flames reaching for the roof. In minutes, the whole structure would be engulfed. I have to try, Coulter said, and Mara heard in his voice all the weight of 8 years of building this ranch alone, of pouring his grief and hope into every fence post and nail. The barn wasn't just wood and stone to him. It was survival. It was purpose. It was the life he'd built from ashes. Then I'm coming with you, Mara said. No, you stay here. Protect the children. The children are safe in the cellar. You'll be dead in the cellar if you go out there alone. Mara grabbed her rifle and checked the chamber. 2 guns are better than 1, and I'm not asking permission, Coulter. I'm telling you. For a moment their eyes locked, and Mara saw him weighing options, calculating odds. Then he nodded curtly. Stay close to me. We move fast. We move together. Anything moves in the shadows. You shoot first and ask questions never. Understood? Understood. Coulter took a deep breath, then yanked open the door. They burst into the night running, rifles up and ready. The barnyard was a hellscape of dancing shadows and flickering light. The fire roared now, consuming the barn's western wall and spreading toward the roof with terrifying speed. Heat rolled over them in waves, and smoke stung Mara's eyes. The animals! Coulter shouted over the fire's hungry crackling. Get them out! He ran for the barn door while Mara covered him, sweeping her rifle across the darkness beyond the firelight. Her heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her throat. Every shadow looked like a man with a gun. Every sound could be footsteps. Coulter wrenched open the barn door and disappeared into the smoke-filled interior. Mara heard the terrified whinny of horses, the panicked lowing of the cow. Then Clementine burst through the door, eyes rolling white with fear, with Coulter right behind her leading the other horse. He slapped their rumps and sent them galloping away from the flames. "The cow!" he yelled, diving back into the inferno. That's when Mara saw the movement. A figure detaching from the shadows near the chicken coop, rifle rising. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. She fired, and the man went down with a scream. "Coulter!" she shouted. "They're here!" Another shot rang out, and the ground exploded near Mara's feet. She dove behind the water trough, returning fire at the muzzle flash. Her hands were steady now, muscle memory and desperation taking over where fear had been. Another shot. Another, keeping their attackers pinned while Coulter worked inside the burning barn. The cow came stumbling out, bellowing in terror, with Coulter right behind her. Smoke poured from the barn door now, and flames were licking through the roof. The whole structure groaned, timbers beginning to fail. "It's gone!" Coulter rasped, his face black with soot. "We have to fall back." A bullet caught him high on the left shoulder, spinning him around. He went down hard, and Mara's world narrowed to that one terrible moment. Coulter falling, blood blooming dark on his shirt, his rifle clattering away across the dirt. She screamed his name and ran, forgetting cover, forgetting safety, thinking only that she couldn't lose someone else. Not again. Not him. She reached Coulter and grabbed his good arm, hauling him up with strength she didn't know she possessed. He was heavy, all muscle and bone and dead weight, but Mara pulled him toward the house, firing one-handed at the shadows to keep them back. Bullets kicked up dirt around them. One tugged at Mara's skirt, another whistled past her ear so close she felt the wind of it. But she didn't stop, didn't slow, just dragged Coulter across the yard while he tried to get his feet under him. They crashed through the door together and Mara kicked it shut, dropping the bar across it just as something heavy slammed against the wood from outside. The door shuddered, but held. Coulter slumped against the wall, breathing hard, blood running down his arm. Mara's hands shook as she examined the wound. The bullet had gone through the meat of his shoulder, missing bone and major vessels but tearing a ragged path through flesh. He'd live, but he needed bandaging, needed cleaning, needed... Another impact against the door made Mara jump. Then Levi's voice, closer than before, called through the wood. "That was stupid, Mara, real stupid. Now you've got a wounded man, a burning barn, and nowhere to go. Just open the door and this can all stop." Mara pressed a cloth against Coulter's wound, applying pressure while he gritted his teeth against the pain. "How bad?" she asked quietly. "I've had worse." His voice was strained but steady. "Can you tie it off?" She nodded and worked quickly, tearing strips from her petticoat and binding the wound as tight as she dared. Coulter's face went gray with pain, but he didn't make a sound. When she finished, he pushed himself upright with his good arm. "We can't stay here," he said. "They'll burn us out, or wait for daylight and pick us off when we try to run. What choice do we have?" Coulter looked toward the trapdoor hidden under the rug. "The cellar. It's got a second exit, old escape tunnel from when this was a way station during the Indian Wars. Comes out near the creek, about 100 yards from the house." Mara's mind raced. "If we can get to the creek, there's cover there. Trees, rocks. Better ground to defend." Coulter winced as he moved his injured shoulder. "But we'll have to move fast and quiet, and the tunnel's narrow. It'll be tight with all of us." Outside, the barn's roof collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. Through the window, Mara could see the entire structure engulfed now, flames reaching 50 feet high. 8 years of work, gone in less than an hour. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Coulter followed her gaze, his expression bleak. "It's wood and nails, can be rebuilt." His eyes found hers. "But you and those children, you can't be replaced. That's what matters." Before Mara could respond, wood splintered as an axe blade crashed through the door. Once, twice, 3 times, opening a gap big enough to see Levi Mercer's scarred face grinning through. "Time's up, Mara." "Go," Coulter ordered, grabbing his rifle with his good arm. "Get to the cellar. I'll hold them here." "I'm not leaving you. You're not leaving me." Coulter's voice was firm despite his pain. "I'll be right behind you, but those children need their mother. Now go." Mara hesitated one more heartbeat, then ran to the trap door. She yanked away the rug and pounded on the wood. "Samuel, open up!" The bar slid back immediately, and Samuel's terrified face appeared. "Mama, what's happening? We heard shooting and..." No time, baby. We have to go. All of us. Now. She helped the children out of the cellar one by one, James clutching Samuel's hand, Lily with her corn husk doll pressed against her chest, and tear tracks on her dirty face. They all stared at the door where the axe blade kept chopping, kept breaking through. There's a tunnel, Mara told Samuel quickly. At the back of the cellar. It leads to the creek. You take your brother and sister down there and you run. Don't stop, don't look back, just run until you reach the trees. What about you? Samuel's voice cracked. I'm coming. Mr. Coulter too. But we have to make sure you get out safe first. The door was failing fast now. Through the widening gap, Mara could see Levi's face, could see the triumph in his eyes as he swung the axe again and again. Coulter fired through the gap, and Levi jerked back with a curse. Go! Coulter shouted at Mara. Before he brings the whole damn door down. Mara grabbed Lily and shoved her toward the cellar opening. Samuel, take them now! I'll be right behind you! Samuel looked like he wanted to argue, but the training Coulter had drilled into him took over. He grabbed James and Lily and practically threw them down into the cellar, then followed, his young face set with determination beyond his years. Mara turned back to Coulter. He was reloading one-handed, his injured shoulder bleeding through the makeshift bandage. The door was more whole than wood now, and Levi had stopped chopping, was probably reloading himself for the final push. Your turn, Coulter said without looking at her. I'll cover you. We go together or not at all? Mara, I said together. She grabbed his good arm and pulled him toward the cellar. He stumbled, whether from blood loss or reluctant agreement she didn't know, but he came. They just reached the cellar opening when the door finally gave way with a crash. Levi Mercer burst through, rifle raised, his two remaining companions right behind him. His eyes found Mara and lit up with vicious satisfaction. There you are, sweetheart. Thought you could... Coulter shot him. The bullet caught Levi in the chest, high and right, spinning him around. He went down hard, rifle clattering from his hands. His men dove for cover, returning fire, but Coulter and Mara were already dropping into the cellar, bullets splintering the floorboards above their heads. Go, go, go! Coulter shouted, pulling the trapdoor shut above them and dropping the bar into place from below. The cellar was pitch black except for the faint light from a candle Samuel had lit. By its flickering glow, Mara could see her children huddled against the far wall, could see the low opening that marked the tunnel entrance. Samuel, she called, lead them through, now! The boy didn't hesitate. He grabbed the candle and duck-walked into the tunnel, James and Lily right behind him. Their small forms disappeared into the darkness, and Mara heard Lily whimpering with fear. It's okay, baby, she called after them. Just follow Samuel. He'll keep you safe. Above them, boots thundered across the floor. Men shouted. Furniture crashed. Someone was prying at the trapdoor, trying to force it open. They'll break through, Coulter said, his voice tight with pain. That bar won't hold long. Can you make it through the tunnel? I'll have to. Coulter looked at her, his face pale from blood loss, but his eyes still fierce. You first. I'll be right behind you. Mara wanted to argue, but the trapdoor was already starting to splinter. She dropped to her knees and crawled into the tunnel, the earthen walls pressing close on either side. The passage was barely wide enough for an adult, and she had to move on her belly, using her elbows to pull herself forward. The darkness was absolute, suffocating. She could hear the children ahead, Lily's soft crying, Samuel's whispered encouragements, the shuffle of small bodies through dirt. Behind her, she heard Coulter grunt with pain as he squeezed into the tunnel. Then an explosion of sound as the trapdoor gave way and men poured into the cellar. The tunnel! Someone shouted. They're in the damn tunnel! Gunshots echoed through the narrow space, deafening in the confined area. Dirt rained down from the ceiling. Mara crawled faster, her dress snagging on roots and rocks, her hands scraped raw. She could hear Coulter behind her, breathing hard, struggling to move with only one good arm. Keep going, he rasped. Don't stop! The tunnel seemed endless, an eternity of darkness and fear and the sound of pursuit behind them. Then, miraculously, Mara saw light ahead, faint gray pre-dawn light filtering through the tunnel exit. Samuel's face appeared, illuminated by the dying candle. Mama, it's here! I can see outside. Go, Mara urged. Get your brother and sister out and run for the trees. Samuel disappeared, and Mara heard him helping the younger children through the opening. Then she was there herself, scrambling out into the blessed openness of the creek bank. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of gray and pink. The creek burbled past, peaceful and oblivious to the violence happening mere yards away. The children were already running toward the tree line 50 yards distant. Mara turned to help Coulter, reaching back into the tunnel to grab his outstretched hand. His face appeared, drawn and gray with pain and blood loss, but he was still moving, still fighting. She hauled him out of the tunnel just as a man's face appeared in the darkness behind him. The man raised a pistol, and Mara didn't think. She just grabbed a rock from the creek bed and threw it with all her strength. It caught the man square in the forehead, and he jerked back with a yelp. "Run!" Coulter gasped, pushing Mara toward the trees. They ran, stumbling across the rocky creek bed with bullets kicking up water around them. Coulter was slowing, his wounded shoulder bleeding freely now, his steps growing unsteady. Mara got under his good arm and half carried, half dragged him toward cover. They crashed into the tree line just as Samuel's voice called out, "Mama, here!" The boy had found a hollow between two massive rocks, a natural fortress hidden by underbrush. Mara shoved the children into it and helped Coulter collapse beside them. His breath came in harsh gasps, his face the color of old paper. "Coulter," Mara pressed her hands against his shoulder wound, trying to stop the fresh bleeding. "Stay with me. Do you hear me? Stay with me." His eyes fluttered. "The children, safe?" "They're safe. We're all safe." It was half lie, half prayer. They were alive, but far from safe. Levi and his men would be through that tunnel soon, would be hunting them through these trees. Samuel pressed close to Mara's side, his young face frightened but determined. "What do we do, Mama?" That's when they heard it, the sound of horses approaching from the west, many horses, moving fast. Through the trees, Mara caught glimpses of riders, at least 6 of them, armed and riding hard toward the ranch. Her heart sank. Reinforcements. Levi had brought reinforcements. But then she heard a voice calling out, commanding and familiar in a way she couldn't quite place. The riders burst into the clearing near the burning barn, and Mara saw they wore badges. The man in the lead was gray-haired and barrel-chested, a marshal's star glinting on his vest. "Sheriff Dunham," Coulter breathed, and Mara heard the relief in his voice. "From Redemption Creek. Must have seen the smoke." The sheriff's voice boomed across the clearing. "Whoever's shooting, throw down your weapons. You're surrounded by the law." There was a moment of confused silence. Then one of Levi's men broke from cover, running for his horse. He didn't make it 10 feet before the sheriff's deputies ran him down. Another surrendered immediately, hands high, weapon tossed aside. But Levi Mercer, wounded and furious, emerged from the cellar tunnel near the creek with his pistol raised. He saw Mara in the trees, saw her huddled with the children, and his face twisted with rage. "You're mine!" he screamed, staggering toward them. "You hear me, Mara? You're mine!" "No," said a quiet voice beside Mara. Coulter had pulled himself upright, rifle braced against the rock despite his injured shoulder. His hands were steady, his aim true. "She's not yours," Coulter said, loud enough for Levi to hear. "She never was, and she never will be." Levi's pistol swung toward Coulter, and Mara screamed, but Coulter fired first. The shot echoed across the water, across the smoking ruins of the barn, across the dawn-painted sky. Levi Mercer fell backward into the creek and lay still, the water running red around him. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Sheriff Dunham and his deputies were splashing across the creek, checking Levi's body, securing the scene. The sheriff looked up toward the trees where Mara and the children were hidden. "Coulter Briggs," he called. "That you up there?" "It's me, John," Coulter called back weakly. "You hit?" "Some." "Well, come on down and let's get you patched up. And somebody tell me what in God's name happened here." Mara helped Coulter to his feet, and together, with the children clustered around them, they emerged from the trees. In the growing daylight, Mara could see the full extent of the devastation. The barn was nothing but smoldering ruins. The ranch house was damaged, its door destroyed, windows shot out. But they were alive. All of them were alive. Sheriff Dunham took one look at Coulter's bloody shoulder and whistled. "That needs a doctor." "The children," Coulter said. "Make sure the children are all right first." One of the deputies, a young woman with kind eyes, knelt in front of Samuel, James, and Lily. "You kids hurt anywhere?" They shook their heads mutely, too traumatized to speak. Lily was still clutching her cornhusk doll, her face streaked with tears and dirt. "They're in shock," the deputy said, "but they'll be okay. Kids are tougher than we think." "Brave as badgers," Coulter murmured, and despite everything, Mara felt tears prick her eyes. Sheriff Dunham helped Coulter sit on a rock while another deputy went to work on his shoulder. The lawman looked at Mara with shrewd, assessing eyes. "You must be the widow Thomas Fielding wrote me about before he died," he said. Mara blinked in surprise. "He wrote to you?" "Asked me to keep an eye out for you, make sure you made it to Coulter's place safe." Dunham's mouth was grim. "Also warned me about Levi Mercer. Said the man was dangerous, that he might come after you. I've been checking in with Coulter every few days, but when I saw that smoke this morning," he shook his head, "got here as fast as I could." Thomas had protected them, even from beyond the grave. Mara's throat tightened with grief and gratitude. "Levi's dead," Dunham said, glancing toward the creek where deputies were pulling the body onto the bank. "And his 2 companions are in custody. They'll hang for arson and attempted murder." He looked at Coulter. "You did what you had to do. Any judge would call it righteous." Coulter nodded wearily. The deputy had finished bandaging his shoulder, wrapping it tight to slow the bleeding until they could get him to a doctor. "Can you ride?" Dunham asked. "If I have to." "You have to. That wound needs proper tending, and your ranch needs rebuilding." The sheriff stood and surveyed the damage. "This'll take time to fix." Mara looked at the ruins of the barn, the damaged house, the scattered animals grazing nervously in the distance. It was overwhelming, impossible. How could they rebuild from this? How could she ask Coulter to do more, to give more, when he'd already sacrificed so much? As if reading her thoughts, Coulter reached out with his good hand and caught hers. "We'll manage," he said quietly. "Together. Together." The words settled over Mara like a promise, not charity, not debt. Together. "Yes," she said, squeezing his hand. "Together." The sun broke over the horizon, flooding the devastated ranch with golden light. In that light, Mara could see not just the destruction, but the possibility. The land was still here. The animals had survived. The house could be repaired. The barn could be rebuilt. And most importantly, they were all alive. She and her children and this steady, brave man who'd risked everything to keep them safe. Sheriff Dunham organized his men to help, some to round up the scattered animals, others to salvage what they could from the barn ruins. The young deputy took the children to the creek to wash their faces and calm them down. And Mara sat beside Coulter on that rock, their hands still clasped, and watched the sun climb higher. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. For standing against Levi, for protecting us, for—" "Don't," Coulter interrupted gently. "You don't owe me thanks, Mara. You and those children, you saved me as much as I saved you." "How?" He was quiet for a moment, watching the smoke still rising from the barn's ashes. "I was dead inside, going through motions. Then you showed up, and suddenly I had a reason to wake up in the morning, a reason to care about more than just surviving." His eyes found hers. "You gave me back my life. So if anything, we're even." Mara wanted to say something profound, something that would capture the enormity of what she felt. But words seemed inadequate. So instead, she laid her head carefully on his good shoulder and simply sat with him, watching the new day dawn over their broken, beautiful, salvageable life. Samuel appeared with his siblings, all 3 children cleaner but still shaken. They clustered around Mara and Coulter like baby birds seeking shelter. "Is it over?" Samuel asked, his voice small. Coulter looked down at the boy. This child who'd been so brave, who'd protected his siblings and followed orders even when terrified. "It's over, son. The bad man's gone. He can't hurt you anymore." "Are we—" James hesitated, finding his words slowly. "Are we staying here? At the ranch?" It was the question they'd all been avoiding. The ranch was damaged, the barn destroyed. Rebuilding would take months, maybe longer. It would be hard work, uncertain work. And Mara and the children had no claim to this place, No right to ask for more than Coulter had already given. But before Mara could speak, before she could offer to leave and spare him the burden, Coulter said, "If your mama agrees, yes. This is your home now, for as long as you want it." 3 sets of eyes turned to Mara, waiting, hoping. And Mara realized that for the first time since Thomas died, the answer was easy. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and sure. "We're staying. We're home." Lily's smile broke across her tear-stained face like sunrise after a storm, and she threw herself into Mara's arms with such force she nearly knocked her mother over. James followed, then Samuel, until all 4 of them were tangled together in an embrace that felt like the first real breath Mara had taken in months. When they finally pulled apart, Mara looked up to find Coulter watching them with an expression she'd never seen before. Soft and unguarded, like a man witnessing something he'd thought lost forever. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something fundamental shifted between them. An understanding passed without words, a promise made without speaking. Sheriff Dunham cleared his throat diplomatically. "Well then, now that's settled, let's get Coulter to Doc Hendricks before he bleeds out from being noble." He gestured to 2 of his deputies. "Help Mr. Briggs onto a horse. Mrs. Fielding, you and the children can ride with Deputy Sarah. We'll get you all into town, get Coulter patched up proper, and figure out next steps." The ride to Redemption Creek was slow and careful, with Coulter swaying in his saddle despite his best efforts to sit straight. Mara kept her children close, one arm around Lily, who sat in front of her on the horse, her eyes constantly checking to make sure Coulter hadn't fallen. He was pale as parchment, his jaw clenched against pain, but he stayed upright through sheer stubbornness. The town of Redemption Creek appeared on the horizon like a mirage. A collection of weathered buildings clustered around a main street, small but substantial. A general store, a saloon, a church with a white steeple, and at the far end, a house with a shingle that read Dr. Hendricks, Physician. People emerged from shops and homes as the procession rode through, their faces curious and concerned. Word had clearly spread, probably carried by one of Dunham's men who'd ridden ahead. Mara felt their stares, felt them taking in her ragged dress, her dirty children, the wounded man who'd fought for them. Doc Hendricks was waiting on his porch, a barrel-chested man with silver hair and gentle hands. He took one look at Coulter and barked orders. "Get him inside. Second room on the left. Mrs. Patterson, I'll need hot water and clean bandages. Move, people." They half-carried Coulter into the doctor's examination room, and Mara tried to follow, but Hendricks stopped her. "He'll be fine, ma'am, but this is going to be messy work, and I don't need an audience. Best you wait with your children." Mara wanted to argue, wanted to stay by Coulter's side, but Lily was clinging to her skirt, and James looked ready to bolt at the slightest provocation. Her children needed her more than Coulter did right now. She nodded and let Deputy Sarah guide them to the waiting room. The next hour crawled by. Samuel sat rigid on a wooden bench, trying to look brave. James pressed against Mara's side, silent and shaking. Lily alternated between dozing and whimpering, her corn-husk doll clutched so tightly its head was starting to come loose. People brought things. A woman from the general store appeared with sandwiches and milk. Another brought a blanket for the children. The preacher's wife offered kind words and a promise of prayers. Small-town kindness, the sort that appeared in times of crisis without being asked for. Finally, Doc Hendricks emerged, wiping his hands on a towel. "He'll live," he said without preamble. "Bullet went clean through, missed the important bits. I've stitched him up and given him something for the pain. He's sleeping now, but he should wake up in a few hours." Mara's knees nearly buckled with relief. "Can I see him?" "Briefly, but don't wake him. Man needs rest more than conversation." She left the children with Deputy Sarah and slipped into the examination room. Coulter lay on a narrow bed, his shoulder heavily bandaged, his face relaxed in sleep. The lines of pain and weariness had smoothed out, making him look younger, more vulnerable. Mara stood beside the bed, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, and felt her heart constrict with something that went far beyond gratitude. This man had risked everything for her, had stood between her children and evil without hesitation, had offered them not just shelter, but a home, not just safety, but belonging. And somewhere in the chaos of the past weeks, Mara had stopped seeing him as Thomas's friend, as an obligation or a debt to be repaid. She saw him as Coulter, just Coulter, strong and steady and scarred by his own losses, trying to build something meaningful from the wreckage of his grief. Just like her. She reached out and gently brushed a strand of dark hair from his forehead, then quietly left the room. Sheriff Dunham was waiting in the hallway. Doc says he'll need to stay put for a few days, can't be jostling that wound on a ride back to the ranch. He studied Mara's face. I've arranged for you and the children to stay at the boarding house. Mrs. Fletcher runs it. She's a good woman, lost her own husband some years back. She'll take care of you. I can't afford, Mara started, but Dunham held up a hand. It's handled. Coulter's got credit in this town, and what he doesn't cover, the town will. You saved one of our own out there, ma'am. We take care of people who take care of us. Mara's throat tightened. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You've got a long road ahead, rebuilding that barn, fixing up the house. Winter's coming in a few months, and you'll need everything squared away before the first snow. Dunham's expression was serious, but not unkind. It won't be easy. Nothing worth having ever is, Mara said quietly. Dunham smiled at that. Thomas said you were tougher than you looked. I'm starting to see what he meant. Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house was clean and comfortable, with rooms that smelled of lavender and fresh bread. The widow took one look at Mara's exhausted children and immediately ushered them upstairs to a large room with 2 beds and a window overlooking the main street. You all get cleaned up and rest, she said firmly. I'll bring up supper in an hour, and don't you worry about a thing. You're safe here. Mara helped the children wash in the basin, scrubbing away layers of dirt and smoke and fear. Lily's golden hair, once grimy and tangled, dried in soft curls. James's face, clean for the first time in days, showed the return of some color. Samuel submitted to his mother's ministrations with the patience of a child who'd grown up too fast but was trying to find his way back to being young. When they were clean and dressed in the spare clothes Mrs. Fletcher had provided, they sat on the beds and simply breathed. No gunfire, no running, no terror lurking just beyond the door. Mama, Lily said softly, is Mr. Coulter going to die? No, sweetheart. The doctor fixed him up. He's going to be just fine. Good. Lily hugged her doll. I like Mr. Coulter. He's nice, and he makes you smile. Mara blinked, surprised. Does he? Samuel nodded. You smile different now than you did before, like you mean it. Out of the mouths of children, Mara thought, came truths adults spent years avoiding. She did smile differently now, felt differently. The suffocating weight of grief that had crushed her since Thomas's death had lifted, not disappeared, but lightened enough that she could breathe, could see a future beyond just surviving the next day. I'm happy, she realized aloud, and the words felt strange in her mouth. For the first time in so long, I'm actually happy. James crawled into her lap, something he hadn't done since he was much smaller. Me too, Mama. I like the ranch. I like the chickens. He paused, considering. I like having Mr. Coulter around. He listens when I talk about things. He does, Mara agreed, stroking her son's hair. He's a good listener. Are we going to marry him? Lily asked with the blunt curiosity of a 4-year-old. Like how you were married to Papa? Mara's breath caught. That's not... We haven't discussed... But you like him, Lily persisted. And he likes you, I can tell. Lily, it's not that simple. Why not? Samuel asked, and his voice was older, more serious. Papa's gone, Mama. We all know it. And Mr. Coulter's a good man. He protects us. He teaches us things. The boy's voice wavered. He makes it hurt less. Missing Papa, I mean. Mara's eyes filled with tears. Oh, Samuel. I don't want you to be sad forever, Samuel continued, and now he was crying too. I want you to be happy, like you were before Papa got sick, and Mr. Coulter makes you happy. I see it. Mara gathered all 3 children close, and they cried together. For Thomas, for everything they'd lost, for everything they'd found, for the complicated tangle of grief and hope and new beginnings that didn't erase the past, but made space for a future. I loved your father, Mara said when she could speak again. I loved him with everything I had. And I always will, but you're right. He's gone. And I think, she paused, testing the words, I think he'd want us to be happy, to build a life, to not spend forever mourning what we lost. So you do like Mr. Coulter? Lily asked hopefully. Mara smiled through her tears. Yes, baby. I do like Mr. Coulter. Very much. The children cheered, and despite everything, the trauma, the exhaustion, the uncertainty, Mara laughed, really laughed, from deep in her belly, until she was hiccuping and gasping and feeling more alive than she had in months. Mrs. Fletcher brought supper as promised, roast chicken and mashed potatoes and green beans with apple pie for dessert. The children ate like they'd never seen food before, and Mara realized it had been hours since any of them had eaten. She made sure they each had seconds, watching with satisfaction as color returned to their cheeks. That night, with the children finally asleep in the big bed, James curled around Samuel, Lily sprawled across both of them with her doll tucked under her chin. Mara sat by the window and looked out at the quiet street. Somewhere in this town, Coulter was healing. Somewhere on the prairie, the ranch was waiting. And somewhere inside herself, Mara was changing, becoming someone new while still honoring who she'd been. She thought about Thomas, about the life they'd built and lost. Would he approve of this? Of her finding comfort with his old friend? Of the children learning to love another man? She thought he would. Thomas had been many things, but never petty or possessive. He'd loved his children fiercely and would have wanted them safe, happy, cared for. And he'd trusted Coulter enough to send Mara to him, knowing what that might mean. Thank you, she whispered to the darkness, to Thomas's memory, to whatever part of him still lingered in the world. For leading us here. For giving us a second chance. The next 3 days passed in a strange limbo. Mara visited Coulter twice daily, sitting by his bedside while he slept, or when he woke, talking quietly about small things. The children came once, tiptoeing into the room with wide eyes, to see Mr. Coulter looking pale, but alive. He managed to smile for them, to answer Lily's dozens of questions about whether getting shot hurt, and whether he'd have a scar, and whether scars were like badges of honor. The best kind, he told her seriously, means you fought for something worth fighting for. Like us? Lily asked. Exactly like you. On the fourth day, Doc Hendricks declared Coulter well enough to travel if they went slowly. Sheriff Dunham organized a wagon and a small crew of men from town to accompany them back to the ranch, bringing supplies and tools for the rebuilding effort. The ride back was nothing like the desperate flight that had brought them to town. Coulter sat in the wagon bed, propped up on blankets with his arm in a sling, while Mara drove and the children clustered around him asking endless questions about what they'd rebuild first and whether they could get more chickens, and could they maybe have a dog. When the ranch came into view, Mara's breath caught. In the daylight, the damage looked even worse. The barn was nothing but a blackened skeleton. The house's windows were shattered, bullet holes pocked the siding. But the windmill still turned, the land still stretched out in all directions, and the animals had been rounded up and were grazing peacefully in the corral the townsmen had repaired. It's not as bad as it looks, Coulter said quietly beside her. It looks pretty bad. I've seen worse. We'll manage. That word again. We. Not I. We. The townsmen set to work immediately, and Mara was amazed at how quickly things progressed with many hands helping. By nightfall, the house's windows were covered with oiled paper to keep out the weather. The worst of the debris was cleared, and someone had even managed to salvage Coulter's bed from the damaged bedroom. Mrs. Patterson from town had brought food, enough for an army, Mara thought, and the women who'd come along set about organizing the kitchen, washing dishes, making the house livable again. They worked around Mara with cheerful efficiency, and she understood this was how frontier communities survived. Everyone helped everyone, because next time it might be your ranch burning, your family in danger. That evening, after the townspeople had headed back and the children were asleep in the newly cleaned bedroom, Mara and Coulter sat on the porch in the gathering dusk. His arm was still in a sling, and he moved carefully, but the color had returned to his face. I've been thinking, Coulter said after a long silence. About? About what comes next. The rebuilding, the winter, He paused, seeming to gather courage. The future. Mara's heart picked up speed. And? Coulter turned to face her, his expression more serious than she'd ever seen it. I meant what I said. This is your home, you and the children, for as long as you want it. But, Mara, I need you to understand something. What? This isn't about the debt to Thomas anymore. It stopped being about that weeks ago. He took a breath. You've become important to me. You and those children. Not as obligation or charity, but as... He struggled for words. As family. As the family I thought I'd lost forever. Mara's throat tightened. Coulter? Let me finish. His good hand found hers. I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving Thomas, and I'd never ask you to forget him or stop loving him. But when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'd like to... He stopped, started again. I'd like to build something with you. Not to replace what you had, but to create something new. Something that honors the past while making room for the future. Mara looked at their joined hands, at this man who'd risked everything for her, who'd shown her children kindness and patience and strength. She thought about Thomas, about the love they'd shared, and realized that loving him didn't mean she couldn't love again. The heart wasn't a finite resource. It could expand, could make room for new love without diminishing the old. I'm not asking for an answer now, Coulter continued. Take all the time you need. I just wanted you to know that when you're ready, I'm here. I'll wait however long it takes. What if I told you, Mara said slowly, that I don't need time, that I've already decided? Coulter's breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying that you're right. This stopped being about debt a long time ago. I'm saying that you make me feel safe and seen and valued. I'm saying that my children love you, and you're good to them, and that matters more than anything. She turned to face him fully. I'm saying that I think Thomas sent me to you not just to save us, but to save you too. To pull you out of your own grave and remind you that life is for the living. Mara, I'm not Thomas's widow anymore, she said firmly. I'm just Mara, a woman trying to build a life for her children, and I'd like to build that life with you, if you're willing. For a moment, Coulter just stared at her. Then, moving carefully because of his injury, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, and tasted of new beginnings, and when they pulled apart, both of them were crying. Is that a yes? Mara asked, smiling through her tears. That's a yes, Coulter confirmed. To all of it. To building a life. To being a family. To... He paused. To marrying you, if you'll have me. Mara's heart soared. Are you asking? I am. Mara Fielding, will you marry me? Will you let me be a father to your children and a husband to you? Will you help me rebuild this ranch and make it a real home again? Yes, Mara said without hesitation. Yes to all of it. They sat together on that porch as the stars came out, making plans for the future. They'd rebuild the barn before winter, bigger and better than before. They'd fix up the house, maybe add a room for Samuel since he was getting older and needed space. They'd plant a bigger garden in the spring, maybe get some pigs, definitely get that dog the children wanted. And they'd marry. Soon, before the snows came. A simple ceremony with the children and whoever from town wanted to come. Nothing fancy, just honest and real and true. 2 weeks later, on a crisp autumn morning with the sky impossibly blue and the prairie grass golden in the sun, Mara Fielding became Mara Briggs. The ceremony was held outside, with the partially rebuilt barn as backdrop and the whole town of Redemption Creek in attendance. Mara wore a dress she'd sewn herself from fabric the townswomen had donated, simple blue cotton that brought out her eyes. Coulter wore his best shirt, the one Mara had made him, and his arm was finally out of the sling, though the wound was still healing. Samuel stood as Coulter's best man, looking so grown up and serious it made Mara's heart ache. James and Lily scattered wildflowers, prairie stars, and asters along the makeshift aisle. Sheriff Dunham gave Mara away, standing in for the father she'd lost years ago. And the traveling preacher who'd happened through town that week spoke words about love and second chances, and the way God worked in mysterious ways. When Coulter slipped the ring onto Mara's finger, a simple wooden band he'd carved himself during his recovery, smooth and perfect and made with his own hands, she felt something inside her settle into place. This was right. This was home. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the preacher declared. You may kiss your bride. Coulter did, tenderly and thoroughly, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Lily squealed with delight. Samuel grinned. James clapped his hands and actually laughed, the sound bright and clear as bells. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. The townswomen had organized a feast, roasted chickens and fresh bread and vegetables from the autumn harvest. Someone brought out a fiddle and people danced in the yard, kicking up dust and laughing. Children ran wild, playing tag around the windmill. Mrs. Fletcher cried happy tears and kept telling everyone that romance wasn't dead, that true love could bloom even in the hardest soil. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Mara found herself standing with Coulter near the foundation of the new barn. The framework was already up, the skeleton of what would become a magnificent structure, bigger than the old one, stronger, built to last. "This is going to be beautiful," she said, imagining it finished. "It is," Coulter agreed. "We'll have it done before the first snow, and come spring, we'll fill it with new animals, build this ranch into something strong." "We already have," Mara said softly. "The ranch isn't the buildings or the animals, it's us, this family we're creating." Coulter pulled her close with his good arm. "You're right. And speaking of family," he nodded toward where the children were playing with some of the town kids, Lily's laughter ringing out across the yard. "They're happy." "They are. You did that. You gave them back their childhood." "We did that. Together." He kissed the top of her head. "That's how it works now. Everything we do together." Together. The word had become a promise, a foundation, a future. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the children were asleep and the ranch was quiet under a canopy of stars, Mara stood in the doorway of the house, her house now, truly, and looked out at the land. The burned barn skeleton was barely visible in the darkness, but she could see the outline of the new structure rising beside it. She could see the windmill turning, the corral where horses dozed, the garden where she'd planted fall vegetables. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the desperation, the fear, the grief. The moment she'd driven that broken wagon up to this ranch with 3 starving children and no hope left. The question Lily had asked that first night, her small voice trembling with exhaustion and uncertainty. "Mama, is this our new home?" Mara had been too afraid to answer then, too broken to see past the next hour, the next day. But now, standing in the doorway of a life rebuilt from ashes, she finally knew the answer with absolute certainty. Behind her, she heard Coulter's footsteps. He came to stand beside her, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Mara smiled. "Home, and how sometimes you have to lose everything to find what you were really searching for." "And what was that?" She turned to face him, this man who'd given her family a second chance at life, who'd shown her that hearts could heal and love could bloom even in the hardest seasons. "Belonging," she said simply. "A place where we're not just surviving but thriving, where the children can grow up safe and loved, where I can build something lasting." Coulter pulled her into his arms, careful of his still healing shoulder. "You have that now. We all do." "Yes," Mara agreed, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Yes, we do." In the bedroom, Lily stirred and mumbled in her sleep. Mara heard her daughter's drowsy voice, probably talking to that eternal corn-husk doll about the day's adventures. And then, clear as birdsong in the morning, came the words that made Mara's eyes fill with happy tears. "Daisy," Lily whispered to her doll, "we're home now. We're really, really home, and we're safe here." Mara closed her eyes and let the truth of it wash over her. They were home. After all the running, all the fear, all the desperate hoping, they had found their place in the world, not in spite of the hardship, but because of it. Not avoiding the grief, but carrying it forward into something new. And not alone, never alone again, but together, bound by love and choice and the daily decision to build something beautiful from broken pieces. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers, and the promise of seasons yet to come. Winter would bring its challenges, spring its renewal, summer its abundance. The years would unfold with their mix of joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle. But through it all, they would have this: a home built on solid ground, a family forged in fire, and love that had survived the worst and emerged stronger for it. Coulter tightened his arm around Mara's shoulders. Ready to come inside. She took one last look at the stars, at the land that stretched out in all directions, at the life they were building together. Then she turned toward the light spilling from the doorway, toward the sound of her children's peaceful breathing, toward the future waiting to be written. Yes, she said, her voice full of certainty and hope and quiet joy. I'm ready. And hand in hand they stepped across the threshold into home.